So we have to improvise. Okay, so today is July 7th, 2018, and we begin 3 times with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so we're continuing now with the reading of, this is the Anguttara Nikaya, the collection of the numerical discourses of the Buddha. And we've been going through the Book of Twos. This is a collection of suttas which are collected because all of them involve 2 items. And as we'll see, that there's a great deal of variation in the topics that are covered in these discourses. So it's a little bit like a mixed bag where the suttas will vary from one topic to the next. Okay, so now I think this is the point where we left off last week or last time. And so here we have a series of suttas which speak about how unwholesome qualities arise and how, I think afterward it will speak about how wholesome qualities arise. Okay, so this series of suttas says that unwholesome qualities arise with the basis, not without a basis, and with the abandoning of this basis, these bad, unwholesome qualities do not occur. So this is actually a sort of, this statement is based upon a fundamental principle of the Buddha's teaching, which is that all phenomena arise in dependence upon conditions. So that is, we could say, that's the philosophical principle, the basic philosophical principle of the Buddha's teaching. That whatever states arise, whatever phenomena arise, all arise through their appropriate conditions. When the appropriate conditions come together, the phenomena arises, and if we're going to stop that phenomena, we have to stop the conditions. For example, if we want a fire, then we need a match, a matchbox, some oxygen, and we have to apply the effort of rubbing the match against the matchbox, and then we get the flame. I mean, the same principle, if you use a lighter, it still depends upon the flint and, I don't know what the components, but you press down on that switch and then strikes against the flint, then a spark comes, and with the fuel, then you get the flame. Okay, but the Buddha isn't just interested in sort of the objective study of the causes of phenomena like modern science, but he's interested in the phenomena that are responsible for those states of mind that produce suffering. So that is another fundamental principle of the Buddha's teaching, that the Buddha says, what I teach is suffering and the ending of suffering. And so if we're going to put an end to suffering, we have to see and understand what are the causes and conditions responsible for suffering. And the Buddha traces the origin of suffering, the cause of suffering, back to the mind. And so suffering arises through certain unwholesome states of mind. These are states of mind that we call in Pali language Yeah, in the Pali language we call these states kilesa. In Sanskrit, klesha. For those who know Chinese, it's fun now. And so here the Buddha is saying that unwholesome qualities, by qualities is meant states of mind, factors of the mind or mental processes, arise with a basis. That is, they arise through certain conditions, not without a basis. And then it's with the abandoning of this basis that these unwholesome qualities do not arise. And then we'll see that the following suttas are all sort of constructed on the same pattern. They just use different words to indicate the cause or condition for the arising of these states of mind. So the next speaks about arising with a source. Here it specifically says through a cause. Then the next through causal activities, with a condition. So all of these are basically just synonyms. All of them are indicating that there's some kind of underlying causal matrix for the arising of unwholesome qualities, unwholesome states of mind. And what are these unwholesome states of mind? We'll actually see further below. Okay, here we find a series of suttas that are going to be speaking about the actual conditions for the arising of these unwholesome states of mind. So the fundamental unwholesome states of mind are greed, get away, go away, hatred, wrong view. And the wholesome states of mind will be non-hatred, non-greed, and right view. Okay, so this sutta speaks about two conditions for the arising of greed. And the word greed has a very, very wide range of meanings in Buddhism. Usually, in English, when we use the word greed, we usually think just of greed, excessive desire for food, and for money, maybe especially for money. But in Buddhism, it's a kind of craving. Greed can signify craving that can arise for any kind of sense object, anything that's occurring through any of the sense faculties, as well as greed for wealth, greed for power, greed for fame, greed for status, greed for praise, greed for admiration from others. All of those are objects of greed. And then the Buddha says,
I just wanted to know if in this context, greed can also mean desire for continued existence.
yeah, but please hold the questions till when we reach a certain point where it's suitable for me to pause, then I'll say, are there any questions? Okay, so here we have a sutta that speaks about two conditions for the arising of greed. So what are these two? One is called the mark of the attractive. The other is careless attention. Okay, the mark of the attractive refers to the attractive feature of things. So there's the object which has some kind of presents a pleasant appearance, which an object that promises enjoyment, that promises unqualified, endless, inexhaustible, ultimately satisfying pleasure and happiness. So that would be the mark of the attractive. So that is a feature which is inherent in the object, but then for greed to arise in relation to that object, something else is necessary on the subjective side. This is what is translated here as careless attention. But thank you. And the Pali expression, very important term that occurs again and again. Ayoniso manasikara. I use a capital A here to show that it's a long A. Okay, the word ayoniso is somewhat interesting. It's the negation of another word, yoniso. Can you see this all right in the back? Okay, so actually the word here is raga. Greed is not a satisfactory translation. I would translate raga more as lust. Though the two, lust and greed, somewhat similar, but lust maybe has a wider range. It more specifically indicates all five senses, as well as the things like wealth, position, status, and so on. So the two conditions, the mark of the attractive is subhanimitta, then the other one is ayoniso manasikara. And yoniso manasikara is the negation of the word ayoniso, is the negation of a word yoniso, which is based on the word yoni. And one of the meanings of yoni is the womb. And the womb is the origin of things, of living beings come out from the womb. And so yoniso means tracing things back very deeply to the root, looking at things in terms of their origin, or looking at things from, we could say, from top to bottom, or examining things inside and out. So that would be yoniso manasikara. That would be careful or thorough attention. Then the opposite of that, the negation of that, is ayoniso manasikara. So this is what is translated here as careless attention. We could also render it, in terms of its sense, as superficial attention, superficial attention, careless attention. What would be some other good synonyms? Wrong attention. Okay, so this is looking at something that's attractive and focusing on its attractive features and not seeing that underneath those attractive features there is the potentiality for dissatisfaction, for suffering. And so whenever we find something attractive, we focus upon those attractive features, and we don't see that underneath the attractive feature there are certain inherent drawbacks, we could say dangers, perils, potential for dissatisfaction. Okay, let's take an example. Okay, maybe I'll take a relatively coarse example. We have delicious food, so we get a serving of delicious food, and we find it very delicious, and so we eat it, and we enjoy the taste, and then because of that enjoyment of the taste, we see, we're at one of these buffet restaurants where there are all sorts of dishes put out, all you can eat for $10, and so many delicious dishes are out there. And so we go on eating and eating and eating, stuffing ourselves. And then what happens later that day, if we overeat, what happens? You get stomach ache, or what else could happen? No, it's not poison food. Okay, you get fatigued for the whole day, but sometimes even worse things than fatigue and stomach ache. Yeah, you can throw up. And then when you're vomiting, you get the nausea and you're vomiting and you're making a vow to yourself, I'm never going to stuff myself again. But then what happens next week if your friends invite you to go out to a buffet restaurant? You start eating too much again. And then what happens if you persistently overeat? You have a good cook and you're always eating and eating and eating. Then you gain too much weight, and then you go to the doctor, and the doctor checks your blood pressure and your, what they call is it the body mass ratio, whatever they, body mass index, and says, Fred, I have some news for you. Your body mass index, very bad. You have to go on a diet. But if you don't go on that diet, you keep on stuffing yourself, eating over and over, then stroke, heart condition, early death. Okay, so this is just one example. And okay, another example is sexual pleasure. So people think that sort of the ultimate joy and delight in life is through sexual indulgence. And if they don't moderate their indulgence, then it becomes a kind of addiction. And the people are just driven again and again in the hope of finding pleasure and sexual enjoyment. And it always proves to be a disappointment. I have to say I'm a celibate person, so I don't. Okay, so this is just the nature of the way greed arises or lust arises through the mark of the attractive. That's inherent in the object. And then there's careless attention. And the sort of antidote to greed or to lust arising, the mark of the attractive remains, but one has to apply to that careful attention. And careful attention is to look into the object of enjoyment deeply. And when one looks into the object of enjoyment deeply, then one sees that what appears to be attractive is just, or that appearance of attractiveness is just a kind of superficial film or coat overlying a mass of dissatisfaction. And I would say that probably the most fundamental cause of dissatisfaction or of unhappiness in the attractive is the fact that everything is impermanent and subject to change. And so when we become attached to that which is enjoyable, that's a cause of pleasure, when it changes, and then we try to hold on to it and cling to it, but just in our hands as we're clinging to it, it's like sand, like grasping a fistful of sand. And as one grips the fistful of sand, the sand comes flowing out between one's fingers and out from the side of one's fist. And when one opens the hand, maybe there's just a little bit of sand left because of the sweat of the hand. All of the rest of the sand is gone. And so when we try to grasp that what's impermanent, it slips away from us. And if we've really built up our hopes on what's impermanent, then we're going to be disappointed. And so one of the antidotes or the remedies that the Buddha teaches to prevent the arising of greed is to reflect on the fact that everything that we can become attached to is impermanent. Whatever arises is subject to cease, to stop. And so when we have something enjoyable, like if we get delicious food, of course we can eat it, we don't have to push it away. But if we reflect on the potential danger and drawback, say in overeating, then we'll be able to eat with moderation. And with regard to other objects of pleasure, if we reflect on their impermanence, then we can make use of them, but when it comes time for them to go, we'll be willing to let them go. There won't be that clinging to them, and then we'll be able to enjoy them, but let them go, and we won't be vulnerable to suffering when things change. Okay, so that is the conditions for the arising of greed. Okay, then there are conditions for the arising of hatred or ill will. Yeah, here the text uses the word dosa. So it says, patiga nimitta, that's a repulsive object, some object that will normally cause some dislike or aversion. And then again, careless attention, a yoniso manasikara. So we could say that hatred, usually, most commonly it arises in regard to other people. Maybe that's the strongest form. Of course, there's kind of dislike of things like maybe if we get disagreeable food or we're listening to disagreeable music, we're on the bus and somebody is blasting behind us with the radio blasting. For me, it's this hard rock music. Bam, 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 heavy metal music. Of course, if they're playing Mozart or Vivaldi, turn it up, please. Okay, but maybe the strongest object of hatred are other people. And so, the hatred arises when we turn to them carelessly, when we attend to them carelessly, when we focus on their bad characteristics. So what the Buddha teaches as the antidote for the arising of hatred is to develop loving kindness towards those people towards whom we feel some kind of antagonism or some kind of aversion. And this is done usually in the systematic development of loving kindness. One doesn't begin with the person towards whom one has ill will. Because if one begins with that person, the mind is just naturally going to focus on the disagreeable characteristics of that person. And so we think, I'm going to develop loving kindness towards my enemy, the hostile person. And then one sits down and starts wishing, may that person be well, may that person be happy. But what did that person say to me yesterday? What kind of nerve did he have? Or he slighted me, didn't even say hello to me. And then the mind will be focusing upon those features that naturally give rise to ill will. So to develop loving kindness towards the disagreeable person, we usually have to proceed in the sequence of developing loving kindness first towards oneself, then towards agreeable people, then towards neutral people, and finally one could bring in the disagreeable person. But it is when we gain that practice, developing loving kindness towards the earlier types of people, then we get some kind of, I call this a power of loving kindness. A certain mental force builds up so that we're then able to turn our attention to the person that provokes and arouses ill will and extend the loving kindness towards that person. And sometimes we have to do that by adding some additional reflections, like the ones that I found most useful myself, is to think that this person who seems to be so disagreeable, so antagonistic, such a miserable person, is a human being just like myself. That this person, maybe they have parents who love them and think, oh, Fred, we love you so much. Oh, we want you to be happy. And when Fred comes home after a long trip away, the parents welcome him with open arms. And even though when I see Fred after he's returned after a long trip, I think he should have stayed a couple of weeks more. But his parents love him so much. And maybe he has a wife who loves him so devotedly. And maybe he has children who are so devoted to him. And so if I consider that, I have this ill will towards Fred just because of my particular mental makeup and because of things that have taken place in my relationship with Fred. But other people can have very different experiences with Fred. And maybe Fred thinks that, that Bhante is such a malicious person, such a mean, miserable person. I wish he'd get out of this monastery. When I see the other monks, the other nuns, I'm always so happy. But when this Bhante turns up, I don't know, it just ruins my day. So everything is very subjective, how we evaluate other people. And so when we then turn back to the person that arouses ill will in us, we consider this person both from their internal standpoint, that that's a human being just like myself, who wants to be well, who wants to be happy, and consider that this is a person that other people might have a favorable opinion of that person. And even if a lot of people think that that's a nasty, malicious person, then we can reflect that the reason this person is nasty and malicious is because in their own, maybe their own childhood, they had a lot of stressful relations with their parents. Maybe they were bullied in school. And then when they grew up, they became a bully in turn. So when we look at the causes and conditions for the development of this person's character, instead of reacting to that person with antagonism, maybe this will arouse compassion for that person. Okay, so this is some of the ways of dealing with those people and things that we take to be repulsive and applying careful attention to them in ways that will arouse, instead of antagonism and ill will and hatred, will give rise to loving kindness and compassion. And what about external conditions, not other people, but things that cause displeasure? Like, I don't know, just this past week, we had terribly hot weather. And so if we attend carelessly to that hot weather, it makes us feel so miserable, right? We think that's so hot, so oppressive. It's probably almost 100 degrees. How do we get over that? I was waiting for somebody to say that. And I found my air conditioner wasn't working this week. What do you do? What? Okay, one thing you could do, of course you have to endure it, but what I found useful, and it's a rather sad talk, a sad thought, I saw that the temperature in Montreal, Canada was 110 degrees last week. And the temperature in some of the cities in the Middle East was about 110. Qatar, Pakistan, what's Islamabad or Karachi, Delhi, New Delhi, up in over 100, 105, 106, up to 110. And so here we're probably 96, 97. So what am I complaining about? Anyway, there are various ways to develop patience under difficult conditions. Okay, maybe any questions so far on the causes and conditions for the arising of greed or lust, the arising of hatred and ill will? Okay, now we come to the conditions for the arising of wrong view. So there are two conditions for the arising of wrong view. So what are the two? One is said to be, the Pali expression is parato goso. The parato cha goso. And again, ayoniso manasikara, careless attention. And then the conditions for the arising of right view are the same. Parato goso, that's the voice of another, the utterance of another, and in this case, wise attention. So the way one comes to adopt a wrong view is by hearing the opinion of others And so others might say that there's no existence after this present life. This life is the only life we have, and there's no results of our actions, good and bad deeds. Whatever we do, when the deed is done, it's over and finished. It has no consequences for us beyond the present moment. And so we might as well just enjoy our life here and now. And this practice of observing precepts, restraining oneself, sitting in meditation to control the mind, all of a waste of time. Just you get this one life, and now you're young. Not to apply to me. Anybody here in their 40s, 30s? You're young, enjoy yourself while you can. You're in your 30s. You're not even in your 20s yet. So what are you coming to this Buddhism class for? On a Saturday morning, you should be out playing with your friends, enjoying. Enjoy yourself. Okay, so that is some example of the utterance of another. And it can get worse than that, you know. Even if somebody has some moral scruples about committing a robbery, then you might convince that person, don't worry, there's no bad consequences. You're just, because you had a religious upbringing, so you're troubled by your conscience, but that's just a result of your conditioning, man. Come on, show some courage. Show that you're a person with a spine, not a little meek weakling thinking, oh, God's going to punish me. Oh, I'm going to get the results of bad karma. Come on, we're living in the 21st century. And then you could persuade that person to commit all sorts of unwholesome deeds. And so first you adopt the wrong view, and then from the wrong view comes wrong speech, wrong action. So this is the utterance of another, and then if one attends carelessly to that utterance of another, instead of examining it wisely and then rejecting it, one reflects carelessly or wrongly, then one can adopt the wrong view. And then that becomes one's own wrong view. And then similarly, the same conditions, two conditions for the arising of right view. So the two are the utterance of another person and careful attention. And it's said here that especially for the arising of the liberating right view, the world transcending right view, that except for the Sammasambuddha, the perfectly enlightened one, everybody else is dependent upon hearing or learning right view from another person. So that brings out the importance of having a teacher who will teach the Dhamma correctly so one gains right view. And then having heard about right view from another person, then to make that right view your own, you have to reflect carefully and wisely upon that view. And then you acquire that right view. And that becomes then part of your mental equipment, your spiritual equipment. Okay, so those suttas are elaboration of showing how unwholesome states of mind arise through a cause, arise through a condition. Okay, now we're going to move quickly through these suttas. These are just groups of twos. This is interesting. It seems like this part of the Anguttara Nikaya is almost like a table of contents or a kind of summary of principles that would have been taught in greater elaboration by the Buddha, and then somehow they're brought together in these pairs of terms without any explanation, almost as like a kind of outline of the teaching for the monks to memorize, to bear in memory. Okay, now we come to contrast of two kinds of fools and two kinds of wise people. But these are explained in relation to monastic principles, so I'm not going to dwell on these. This is an interesting one. Okay, here the sutta says, the taints of defilements increase for two kinds of persons. What are the two? One who feels remorse about a matter over which one does not need to feel remorse, and one who does not feel remorse about a matter over which one should feel remorse. The taints increase for these two kinds of people. And then the opposite of this is that the taints do not increase for two kinds of people. One who does not feel remorse for a matter over which one does not need to feel remorse, and one who feels remorse for a matter over which one should feel remorse. So this actually relates, yesterday evening, Venerable Mangala here asked me almost a question, almost on the same, bearing on the same topic. Okay, if one does a bad deed, okay, the question is, does the karma become worse if one feels remorse for that bad deed or does not feel remorse for that bad deed? Okay, and the answer that I gave is that the karma will be worse if one does not feel remorse. If one commits some bad deed and one thinks, that's okay, doesn't matter, and then there's no pangs of conscience. And so if one thinks in that way, then one will be susceptible to repeating that deed in the future. It's like a little boy goes into a shop and he sees a variety of items for sale. He looks around, nobody's watching. He takes it, puts it in, maybe he has a raincoat with an inside pocket. And if I know all of this, that bad little boy was me when I was a kid. Puts it in the inside pocket, and then whistling, walks out of the shop, and so no remorse, and then he gets away with it. Then he's tempted in the future to commit theft again, until over time, not feeling any remorse, never getting caught and reprimanded by others, he gets to be a teenager and he's staging minor robberies, gets to be in his early 20s and he becomes a member of a gang of thieves. And this way, little by little, that bad tendency gets strengthened till he becomes deeply ingrained, entrenched in this kind of misconduct. But if one commits some bad deed, and then one feels remorse over it, and then one recognizes that was a wrong deed, And then through that remorse, one gets motivated to change one's ways of conduct. If one is a Buddhist, one might maybe go to one's altar, one's shrine room, and then before, in the presence of the Buddha, Bodhisattvas, one makes a kind of confession. Bhante, I did something wrong. I hereby confess and repent this deed. And then one bows down. Then one is creating a kind of positive counteractive force to that tendency. And since throughout our lives, and even through beginningless samsara, we've been committing these unwholesome deeds over and over. So one of the very beautiful practices that I found in Chinese Mahayana Buddhism is the general confession for all of the wrong deeds that one has committed throughout beginningless samsara. In fact, I even was reciting that in Chinese. Wang Shi So Zhao Chu Ye Jie Yo Wu She Tan Chan Che Jie Zhong Yu Wu Zhong Yu Shan Yu Yi She Shang Jie Yo Jie Yo Jie Yo Jin Zui Fo Qian Chou Chan Wei. Okay, all the evil karma ever committed by me through this beginningless samsara, on account of beginningless greed, hatred, and delusion, arisen by way of body, speech, and mind, I hereby confess and repent it all. So in this way, one does it with a mind of sin, even though one doesn't think of specific things, but one just bears in mind the possibility that one has committed countless unwholesome deeds, and then one expresses remorse over that. Then it's creating a very powerful sort of counteractive force against repeating those kinds of unwholesome deeds. Okay, the rest is a more monastic context. Oh, this is interesting one. And you see the way the topics change in this collection without any kind of preparation for the change. So here, the text says that there are two kinds of persons who are rare in the world. What are the two? One who takes the initiative in helping others, and one who is grateful and thankful. So these two kinds of people, they form like a pair. So one person helps another, does something good, kind deed to others. And then the person on the other end, the person who receives the benefit from another, is one who is grateful and thankful. So these are two kinds of people that are rare in the world. And when the Buddha says this, it, in a sense, you could say, it has the underlying purpose. It's not just to make a statement of fact, but the underlying purpose is to motivate us to be those kinds of people. So what sort of the script that underlies the text is that you should take the initiative in helping others. And when others help you, you should be grateful and thankful. And I saw an example of this over this past week we had for the summer camp here. There were about 200 children, with elder youngsters, who might be in their late teens, early 20s, who were the counselors. And I saw that the children express, first, the counselors are young people, as I said, teenagers, people in their early 20s, who they could be using their summer vacation just to go on vacation, on holiday, to enjoy themselves. But instead, they dedicate these 5 days to serve as counselors, to look after the young kids at the summer camp. And to serve as a counselor, they have to come for 2 weekends in June to receive training on a Saturday and Sunday. So they're sacrificing 2 weekends and then 5 days of the summer camp. They're not getting paid for this, not getting their names blazed on stone monuments, but they're dedicating their time and effort to undergo the training and to look after the young kids. And I saw that the young kids are so grateful to the counselors. I saw on Facebook some of the kids express their gratitude towards the counselors for the way they look after them, when they feel the way they get welcomed when they arrive at the summer camp, and the way the counselors look after them with a great deal of self-sacrifice through these 5 days of the camp. And so this was an example of those who are taking the initiative in helping others, and even these young kids are able to express their gratitude and thankfulness. Okay, 2 kinds of persons are hard to satisfy. What are the 2? One who amasses what he gains, and one who squanders what he gains. Okay, so maybe here we could say that people who gain a lot of wealth and then just accumulate that wealth without using it for any beneficial purposes are hard to satisfy, because they're never satisfied with any amount of wealth. Like we think of some of these multimillionaires and billionaires who are just always playing the stock market and even betting currencies just to gain more and more wealth, even when doing so is creating chaos in the world's financial system. But if they see a prospect for more gain for themselves, then they'll keep on, speculating, even speculating on commodities, even when say speculating on foodstuffs, when the result of that speculation has happened in 2009, 2010, it created spikes in the food prices so that hundreds and thousands of people couldn't afford food. It was too expensive because of these speculators who were speculating on foodstuffs. So that's one kind of person who is hard to satisfy. And then they use their wealth to manipulate the political system. They give their wealth to, they use their wealth to support candidates that they know are going to serve their interests, so they could go on making more and more wealth. There's just no limit. 10 billion is not enough because they could always get 20 billion. 20 billion is enough because there's always 30 billion. And yet, we have a world where people are just struggling to get by on $1, $2 a day. And then the one who squanders what he gains, that is, what the Buddha teaches is that one should use one's wealth wisely. But one who squanders what he gains then finds all of his wealth is gone, and then again he has to make the effort to accumulate more wealth. And the one who is easy to satisfy are the one who does not amass what he gains. Of course, one should store what one gains, not just squander it. One should deposit it and keep it carefully, but one should use it for beneficial purposes and not squander it. Okay, we did the conditions for the arising of greed, hatred, wrong view, right view, monastic topics. Okay, then we have the models. Here the Buddha sets out the model for the monk, that a monk with faith, rightly aspiring, should aspire to become like Sariputta and Moggallana. Those were the two chief disciples. Sariputta was the one who was foremost in wisdom. Moggallana, the monk disciple who was foremost in psychic powers. And then for the bhikkhunis, that's for the nuns, rightly aspiring, they should aspire to become like the bhikkhunis Khema. Khema was the nun who was foremost in wisdom, and Upalavana, she was the nun who was foremost in psychic powers. Then for the lay follower, he says that the male lay follower, rightly aspiring, should aspire to become like Chitta the householder. Chitta the householder he was a layman, but he was very knowledgeable about the Dhamma. So he would invite the monks sometimes to his house for an alms offering. Then when the meal was over, he would ask them subtle questions about the Dhamma that would stump even the monks. And then Chitta himself would explain the Dhamma to the monks. And then the other was called Hattaka of Alavi. I don't remember his specialty. And then for the female lay followers, the ideal of aspiration is to become like the lay follower Kujuttara and Velu Kantaki, Nandamata. It's interesting that Kujuttara was actually a slave woman. Yeah. She was a slave woman in the palace of the queen of, I think it was the state of Avanti. The queen was Samavati, who was the wife of King Udena. And the women of the palace, the queen and her entourage, wanted to listen to the Dhamma, but because they were royalty, they were not able to go out from the palace to attend the Buddha's discourses when the Buddha was visiting Avanti. So the way the women got to hear the Dhamma, they sent their slave woman, Kujuttara, out to listen to the Dhamma. And Kujuttara went and she would sit in the audience when the Buddha was giving a discourse, and then apparently she had a very good memory, so then she would come back to the palace, and then she would relate to Samavati and the other women of the palace the discourse she heard from the Buddha. And as a result of what she related to the women of the palace, all of that material was collected and became one of the books in the Sutta Pitaka. It's called the Itivutaka, the collection of sayings, thus have I heard. And so the Buddha pronounced Kujuttara as the laywoman who was foremost in learning, because she had attended so many of the Buddha's discourses and memorized them. And then Velu Kantaki Nandamata was outstanding in meditation. So she was a non-returner. I think both of them actually. I think Kujuttara also, while listening to the Buddha's discourses, achieved the state of a non-returner, the third level of realization. And Velu Kantaki Nandamata also became a non-returner, and also she had possession of the 8 meditative absorptions, like the 4 jhanas, the 4 formless meditations, and I think also the 9th attainment, the attainment of cessation. I think both were non-returners. And also the 2 layman disciples, Chita the householder and Hattaka of Alavi, they also were both non-returners. Even though Anathapindika is the most famous of the Buddha's lay disciples, because he was the one who offered the monastery and Savatthi to the Buddha. But Anathapindika, when he died, he was only a stream enterer. He didn't go beyond that. But other lay disciples reached the stage of non-returner. Okay, now a completely different topic. Now we have 2 qualities by which a foolish, incompetent, bad person maintains himself in a maimed and injured condition. He becomes blameworthy and subject to reproach by the wise, and he generates much demerit. So we have 3 things here said of the foolish person. One is that this person injures himself. I say probably what's intended here is that he injures himself inwardly by cultivating bad qualities, strengthening bad qualities, which will prevent the development of the mind to higher levels of consciousness. And then morally, the person is blameworthy. And when wise persons hear about his conduct, they will reproach him. And then this person generates unwholesome karma, akusala karma, which is called demerit. That is, demerit is unwholesome karma, which when it ripens in the future, will come back in the form of suffering. So what are these 2 qualities? One, and we have to be very careful we have to pay very careful attention to this, because when I read this, I realized, did I sometimes even fall into this trap? Without investigating and examining, one speaks praise of one who deserves dispraise. And again, without investigation, one speaks dispraise of one who deserves praise. And then the opposite of that, the 2 qualities, the opposite qualities that the wise person possesses, by which the wise person, the good person, preserves himself free from injury, that is, without impairing the development of the mind, without committing deeds that are subject to moral reproach, and by which he generates much merit. That is, having investigated, one speaks dispraise of one who deserves dispraise. And having investigated, one speaks praise of one who deserves praise. So these 2 paragraphs, when we take them together, they're sort of very serious words of caution for us. So when we're tempted to criticize somebody, we have to, before criticizing and blaming and speaking ill of that person, we have to reflect and to examine within ourselves and also looking outwardly, is that person really at fault for the things that we are tempted to blame them for? does that person really deserve criticism? And if on examination we see that the person is actually blameless, but because we bear ill will towards that person, we have some antagonistic attitude towards that person, if we speak ill of that person and criticize them and cut them down in the presence of other people, then we are damaging ourselves and creating dangerous situations for ourselves in the future. So that's one side of the coin. The other side, there might be somebody we like, but we know that person is really at fault. Maybe not such serious faults. But maybe the person, say we assign them some job, either at work or part of a club that you might belong to or in the monastery. We assign them some work and they do their job in a rather sloppy way or careless way, not fulfilling all of their responsibilities. But we think that that person is maybe a powerful person, or we like that person, or we consider that person has a lot of influence with others, and we think that if we get into the good favors of that person, then we can get some benefit for ourselves in the future. And so we start praising that person, even though that person deserves blame and criticism. Then, in that case too, we're damaging ourselves. And so if you just take the first paragraph alone, you might think that the wisest course to take is just to keep silent, not to criticize anybody, not to praise anybody. But that's not the advice that the Buddha gives. The Buddha says that the wise, good person is one who, when it's the proper occasion, will speak dispraise of one who deserves dispraise. When there's the proper occasion, and one has to be able to judge what is the proper occasion, then one will speak dispraise of a person if they deserve dispraise. You know, if the person deserves criticism and they're together with their friends, you don't go up to them in the midst of their friends and then start cutting them down and saying, why did you do that in such a sloppy way? You forgot to do this, you didn't do that. You put this in this place when it should have gone in that place. Because then you're going to hurt that person and embarrass them and humiliate them. And so you don't want to do that. But when you can get that person alone or together with another person who's in a sense in some way responsible for that person, then you can speak dispraise of that person. And again, when it's the proper occasion, then the Buddha says you should speak praise of those who deserve praise. And when you speak praise of those who deserve praise, then you yourself will be praised on the proper occasion. This is also an interesting sutta, and I'd say very important these days. Okay, 2 qualities of the foolish, incompetent, bad person by which he maintains himself by which he injures himself, becomes blameworthy and subject to reproach and generates much demerit. What are the 2? Without investigating, he believes a matter that merits suspicion, and without investigating, he is suspicious about a matter that merits belief. I say this becomes very, very relevant today because we're living in the day of the time of what they call fake news, alternative facts. With the internet, somebody can spread a rumor which can just get multiplied countless times through the echo chamber. And it could have sometimes very dangerous consequences. Like I remember during the time of the 2016 presidential election, what do they call these people who, not a troll, a bot? Is it a bot, an internet bot? Spread a rumor that Hillary Clinton was maintaining a pedophile ring in a pizza shop in Washington, D.C. And that spread through the internet, and then somebody came who was enraged by that, came into that pizza shop with a gun and was ready to start shooting people up. Fortunately, somebody blocked him and prevented him. But this is the kind of example of kind of things that merit suspicion that one is inclined to believe without investigation. So whenever you hear anything on the internet these days, unless it's coming from a real trustworthy source, or maybe even if it's coming from a generally trustworthy source, investigate and scrutinize it. And if you want to make sure, in fact, I found this a very useful website to consult. It's something called Snopes. This website does is to take rumors that are circulating on the internet, then it will begin with that statement, and then it will say true or false. And if it's true, of course, it will check it off and explain why it's true. If it's false, then it will give the explanation how that rumor arose and what the true facts are. Okay, so, and this has become very, very a major demand nowadays if you're following internet news. Don't believe anything that seems suspicious, especially when it's now politicians have realized that they can lie and get away with it very easily because people believe whatever they hear and don't check out the truth behind their statements. So, believing something that merits suspicion and being suspicious about a matter that merits belief. Well, generally I say be suspicious about anything, but after investigation, when the statement seems to be cogent after investigation, then you can place trust in it. Okay, then the wise person is one who having investigated and examined, he remains suspicious about a matter that merits suspicion, and having investigated, he'll place trust in a matter that merits trust. Okay, maybe I hear the gong sounding, so maybe we'll... Excuse me? No, that's the signal that lunch is ready, yeah. You call it the wooden block, wooden fish? So, any questions? Please. Okay, I see. Maybe this microphone can be passed back.
Bhante, on the...
Yeah, that's the gong.
Should I wait for it to end?
You could just speak
over
loudly
it?
through
Okay.
the mic.
The question is about remorse. Doing an action and feeling remorse about it. So, if it's something that you should feel remorse, or something that you've done that you shouldn't have done, you should feel remorse, and that's a positive thing. However, I was wondering, in an extreme example where you say you had a fight with somebody and that person passed away after that fight.
And
Like an example of you had a fight with somebody and that person passed away before you could meet the person again.
yeah,
Now, having remorse on a matter like that could be negative, correct? You should also be able to forgive yourself.
yeah. That brings up an important part about remorse in Buddhism. Like when one commits something wrong and one recognizes that one has committed something wrong, then it's healthy to feel remorse about that. But one should not allow that remorse to become obsessive, something that continues to weigh down on the mind and continually to oppress the mind. Because then it will become like an obsession, an oppressive obsession, so that one is not able to turn the mind in a healthy direction towards positive development. But when one has done something wrong, one recognizes that one has done something wrong. If conditions allow, one tries to make amends for it. Like if one has hurt somebody who's still living, then one can go and apologize to that person. If the person has passed away, then one can't apologize, but one could. Like one example like I gave, in front of the Buddha altar, one can make sort of like a confession that I recognize I did something wrong, I will restrain myself in the future. And in that way one sort of clears the mind of that.
So remorse basically means recognizing that you've done something wrong, but also do something to set things right afterwards. Okay, got it.
Bhante, this was... Hello.
I think it's on.
Yeah. So Bhante, this is just an observation where we talk about, consciously giving or doing good deeds, and then the recipient being grateful.
Yeah.
So invariably we are guided, that just keep doing good deeds and keep, and obviously this may be because of, various religions and what they preach, is that we are grateful, just be generally grateful.
Yeah.
But what I feel the Buddha is saying is specific. He means your relationships with people.
Yeah.
He doesn't mean in a vague way that just do good and just be generally grateful and just don't believe that you are being showered blessings from heaven, etc. You have to acknowledge that it's a person who's doing good to you and you are doing good to a person, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. But also what I would say is that when we do some reflection, we could see that, let's say, the web in which we are immersed, embedded, the web of relationships is much vaster than is immediately evident to us. And so when we reflect in that way, then we can feel like grateful to a greater number of people.
That's true.
Like I hear the bell ring, the gong, I go to the kitchen, and then I find a number of trays are put out for my meal, and I just take it. And it just seems almost like part of the natural order of things. But then I have to reflect that there's the cook. Of course, the cook is getting a salary, but still they're working here at the monastery. It's an act of love. And so they're preparing the food with reverence and dedication. And then there are people on the monastery staff who are charged with like determining how much food we'll need on any particular day, ordering the food, the people who bring the food to us. Then we could also think of the farmers who grow the food and the truckers who bring the food from the farm to the market. So a lot of people, involved in that whole process. And then we have like beautiful grounds of the monastery, and we have people here who mow the lawns and grow the flowers and water the flowers. So lots of things that seem invisible to us, but if we reflect, we see that we are reaping the benefits of the labors of many people. Okay, any further questions? Okay, so in that case, then we'll end for the morning. And I think we have to go into New York. How were we going to go? Okay, I checked the train schedule. Yeah, the eldermost monk in the Chinese Buddhist community in New York City, the Venerable Shi Chan, is that his name? Shi Chan, meaning treasure. Washing. Chan. I see Shi Chan washing dust. I see. Shi Chan, okay. Yeah, he passed away this morning. Or was it last night or this morning? Yeah, so we have to go in to New York for the memorials or for the service. So I checked the train schedule. If we're going to go by train, there's one train at 1:18 and the next one is at 2:20. Which one do you think is? Okay, I think maybe we won't have a Q&A session because I don't know exactly what time we'll have to go in. Okay, so let us end then with the sharing of the merits. So we'll share the merits with the devas, the bhutas or fair spirits, and with all sentient beings. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata Deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya bhavagupadaya vichihetato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha asanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting. A couple of announcements before we end. One is that from July 17th to July 24th, there'll be a 7-day insight meditation retreat here based on the Satipatthana method, the method of the foundations of mindfulness, conducted by Venerable Dhammajiva. He's a meditation master from Sri Lanka. So if anybody would like to attend, then I suggest that you register for that And you can register by going onto the website of BAUS, going online, and registering through the website. That'll be from July 17th through the 24th. And then another announcement, our Tsering Wangil here, he has been coming regularly to this class for a number of years. And I understand that he'll be returning to Bhutan permanently. And so we all want to say farewell to him. He's been a very devoted student of the Dharma. And to thank him for his attendance in this class and support over all these years. So when do you return? What? On the 16th of July. Okay. Do you get applause? Okay, so we'll end with 3 half bows to the Buddha. Drop us where? Into New